All right. Welcome to the Smart to Noise Ratio first ever podcast. We'll have theme music when somebody writes us some, so get after that, all you listeners out there, both of you. This is the first part of this podcast is going to be mostly introductions. I'll start with the blog. I'm a sound guy at a church, and part of my contracted requirements are to do some education for volunteers. I've found that it's really hard to make contact with them and get some one-on-one time. So I decided to try and write down some experiences and some ideas and things. And the blog format I was familiar with already. So I set out to pretty much write down some things for 3 or 4 people. And before I knew it, my counterparts at other churches were using it to teach their guys stuff. And I have readers from coast to coast and around the world. So that was pretty gratifying. Kind of makes me hope I don't suck most days. But it hasn't quite gotten the interaction going. I think a lot of people are used to reading pro audio articles, and there isn't a comment section. So I haven't seen a lot of input. So I just want to encourage people to, if I'm wrong, correct me, or if I didn't go into enough depth or detail, ask for more. And I'm loving it when people hit me up on Facebook or Twitter and just have a question about something, even if it's something they already know some things about. And we've had some cool exchanges like that. So I'm not setting out, or I should say we are not setting out, because I have quite a few guest posters and contributors here at this point. We're not setting out to write white papers about anything. I had tried to do that a couple of times and found it really intimidating. And so most evenings after the dishes were washed and the kids were in bed, it's tough to sit down at 10 or 11 o'clock at night and write a super well thought out, no holes in it paper about something. So the blog and the podcast are both just very conversational, as you'll find. And let me see. Before I introduce my co-host tonight, I'm just going to give you a little background on myself. I started out as an amateur musician and DJ in the early to mid-'90s, which is about 20 years ago now. Played in a band and got sick of making the princely sum of $5 for a week's worth of rehearsing and then going to play out and watching the sound guy walk away with a C note in his pocket, which was a decent amount of money back then with basically amounted to pole speaker gigs. So I started pooling my gear with the bands and learned how to mix live. Worked my way up, built my way up through college, bought some gear. Eventually got to a point where I was building houses during the day and gigging out pretty much every weekend, getting into things like church events and theater and festival stages. Tried my hand at promoting, failed miserably, went back to just mixing, and eventually parlayed my way into larger and larger gigs and through some contacts. Wound up working at a big church, which is the last place I would have expected to be plying my trade, but it's a good fit, and I work with some really creative people, and I have a giant facility to play with. And sitting with me tonight is Karl Maciag, who's my counterpart in that venture. He held the position several years before I came there. So I'm going to turn the mic over to him now and just let him introduce himself and tell us where he came from and where he's going. Over to you, Karl.
Cool. Thanks, John. Cool to be doing something like this and seeing that other people are paying attention and reading and now hopefully listening and hopefully, I don't know, I think in my writing and definitely in John's writing, we tend to write the way that we speak, but, a lot of that emotion or tongue-in-cheek comments, etc., don't come through the print. So hopefully listening, you'll be able to hear what we really are maybe implying that, with what we're saying. But my background, I got interested in sound through church ministry when I was in high school. I was a guitar player and, being at a smaller church, doing anything with music meant, you probably had to do something with sound too, because we didn't, have anybody helping us out, especially the kids. So I started doing that, and the church had a television show that they were producing weekly that was getting, some national sort of play and a little bit of international stuff. And I started off as a camera operator and moved into audio, and it just turned out that I had a little bit of a knack for putting together a mix, or as much as a mix you could put together with no experience and a Mackie 8 bus and, no effects or out gear. So, but it was, I got enough encouragement there that, people telling me that I had the talent to do it, and I decided to go to a trade school. I'll plug the Recording Workshop in Chillicothe, Ohio. After I graduated high school, I went there and learned, oh my God, so much over the months that I was there. And that really set the foundation for me to move forward after that. Came back home to Buffalo and started doing live sound, a little bit of studio stuff, but mostly live sound because that's where the work was. And from that point, doing a lot of church gigs and made some contacts with some smaller production companies, started getting club gigs, started getting house gigs as the club guy, working with national acts, and that took me into the world of touring where I spent a couple years touring across the U.S. and Canada as a front of house guy. And when I was home from there, one of my club contacts, his day job was doing installs, so he helped me out and got me, some side work doing installs, and I moved up in that industry, and now I'm a design engineer for a company where we really do more, I would say 75% of our work is on, more on the video side with corporate video conferencing and stuff like that. But I do quite a bit of audio, especially houses of worship, distributed audio, audio conferencing, for conference rooms and stuff like that, which is a whole different animal from live sound. But, it's all the same physics. It's just, different applications of it. So it's, wore a few different hats, but it all comes out of started with a passion for music. I think anybody reading or listening, it starts as a passion for music, and then it goes, from wherever. And I was playing in a band too, and Jon making $5 a gig was more money than I was making. So I definitely got sick of that after a couple years, and started making okay money doing club sound. And am very fortunate to have a full-time job where I'm able to continue to refine the craft for something that I'm passionate for. So it's a cool place to be, and to get to work with Jon and help him out from time to time on the gig he has now. And it's cool to collaborate with that. So hopefully people listening will want to share ideas too and collaborate with us.
And it's a very small world, especially in our neck of the woods, but even in larger cities. There aren't 6 or even 3 or maybe even 2. I think in sound guys, there's only about 2 degrees of separation. Like, if you run into another sound guy, you either know him or your buddy knows him, or he knows your buddy. Karl brought up his education. I wanted to talk about mine a little bit. I actually started out studying theatrical lighting design at SUNY Purchase. Pretty heavy-duty program taught by Broadway lighting designers and technical directors and stuff. And I watched my classmates really shine at that, and I could kind of get by. But I was also cutting audio and working audio for the student-run productions, which they did some pretty heavy-duty ones, and that was like breathing. And just about that time, they were opening up a production course in the music conservatory on the same campus, so I transferred over there. Started out with a pretty good basis in the visual arts, having a critical eye, and they just polished off that education with like learning how to listen and learning your gear. And I come back to this idea all the time when I'm talking to people. Like, America is one of the few countries, or actually sound design or sound work is one of the few places you can call yourself an engineer without actually having a sheepskin on the wall. And America is one of the few places that doesn't really put as much weight on an engineering background as other countries. Like in Germany, if you're an engineer, you get to put that in front of your name like you're a doctor. You're engineer Maciag if you walk into someplace flipping your business card. There's a lot of operators out there, just appliance operators. They can turn the system on. They can push some faders up. Beyond that, there's a lot of mixers who can kind of apply the craft but don't really understand it. But I think to really be an engineer, you've got to just understand everything from electrons and transistors to cabling, and just really knowing what's going on in the heart of your gear but then also being able to flip sides of your brain at a moment's notice or even at the same time and have all that technical knowledge inform the art that you're going to do as you sit down or stand up to finally actually mix something and help some musicians not just get louder but hopefully get better. Let me see. But education's that's a topic for a whole nother podcast. We get asked all the time, how do I get into this business? Like, the only way to make a small fortune in production is to start with a big one and just whittle it down. So you're definitely, most in fact, aren't going to, even do much more than ever break even, or, if you're real lucky, you get ahead, but, it's about the ride that you take. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in this business that doesn't do it just because they really love doing it. They realized at some point that they weren't going to be John Bon Jovi or, whatever rock star they wanted to be growing up, and found another way into the industry, and to my mind, kind of a cooler way. Like, I look at some of the hash that some of the more famous musicians have to go through, and I'm really glad that it's just my job to unload the truck and patch some things in and not have to, wear a plastic smile and do photo shoots and sell your soul, basically. And I get paid first in most arrangements.
Yeah, that's true. And I've ventured back more into being on the artist side of things in the past couple of years, and it's it's always a grass is always greener thing, and there's a lot of headaches that go along on the artist side that you don't necessarily get being on the production side. But that being said, working 18 hours a day during the summer for 7 weeks straight, not many people would do that for the type of money that typically we make if we didn't really love doing it.
That's for sure.
It's you got a warning to the youngsters. You're not going to have a family life. It's definitely starting out, or social life for that matter. If you're really going to, buckle down and try to make something of it and have a serious go at it. But I think it's worth it. There's a camaraderie, between different engineers, and just not the ones that you see all the time. Like, John and I have our own war stories of working together, but there's also the guys that I've toured with where I was only with them for a couple weeks, but I know that if they were coming into town, it would be no problem getting a ticket to see their show and sitting back and talking with them and just kind of sharing that same thing. It's definitely a brotherhood. It's a family. It's something cool to be a part of. I never found it to be some sort of vicious competition as far as a business goes. I think it's real easy in this business where, if you're good, people are going to know it. And if you're bad, people are going to know it. And, I never found too much politics going into it, which is also kind of refreshing for me. So, yeah.
More psychology than politics, I think. Like, I could teach a whole master class on dealing with guitar players, and and I'm a string player. I played bass and guitar in bands, so like I feel like I kind of have a leg up in the business. I understand where they're coming from in terms of how they're putting their show together and their tone and all that stuff. But that can almost feel like politics at times. But fortunately, that's about as bad as it gets. I mean, usually the villain in the equation is the promoter. There's sort of there's the sketchy underbelly side of the business.
It's always the promoter.
But gosh, so many ideas are popping into my head as we're going. I should be scribbling all this down for a future thing. But it is funny what you say about like we're all basically each other's competition, but we're also like sort of the world's biggest fraternity. I mean, you can run into a guy that from Europe or Japan that barely speaks English, but you both turn the same knobs on the same gear, and you just somehow identify. And you can find a way to work together. It's more often than not very rewarding. And I've definitely made a few eyebrows go up with clients of mine. They kind of get sticker shock when I quote them a price to mix their PTA battle of the bands or something. I'm like, well, you can call the competition if you want. In fact, I've got 3 guys on speed dial right now that I give you a quote. And we aren't maybe in direct competition for gigs like that, but we're all competing for some slice of the pie out there. But also at the same time, watching out for each other's backs. I mean, you definitely don't cross one engineer or rental company or without everybody else in La Familia finding out about it. Mm-hmm. And that's also some power to wield too. I mean, you got to be. I've only ever blackballed a couple of people. It's only happened maybe twice, and it was for really heinous stuff. And I was even then was still pretty cautious and diplomatic about how I did it. So, hey, you got anything else to contribute to the introductory section here?
I think that's enough.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we had our Carl's friend Alfred Brown. We'll give him a shout out. Phoned in one of the earlier requests for an article on the blog, and just wanted to know what thoughts I had on panning. He's a recording engineer, and I believe also does some teaching.
I'm not too sure. Alfred and I were actually back when I was playing 10 years ago. He was really close friends with the singer in the band that I was playing with, and that's how I knew him. And it wasn't until a few months ago that I even knew Alfred was doing anything with audio. So that was just kind of a coincidence. So, I'm glad that he's been, asking questions. And I know there's been times outside of the blog forum that he and I have had conversations about audio and stuff like that. And so I'm not entirely sure how he's operating these days, but it was a good question that he asked about panning in the live realm.
And once I get this whole podcast thing set up, I'll figure out a way to link back to Karl and I have both now written blog posts on the topic, but we kind of felt like there were some nuances and things that we hadn't gotten into in print because we're fairly conscious, like looking at the amount of time people are spending on the site. We're seeing visits that kind of stretch on where people go back through the material, but really the average guy's coming in, spending 2.5 minutes reading something and moving on with his day. So once those posts start to stretch out past 1,500 or 2,000 words, we kind of wrap it up just because we don't want to, overstay our welcome. But it's just it's a deep, deep pool to dive into. Do you pan? Do you not pan? Karl and I both hunted around for some articles that were posted quite a long time ago, actually. I think about 2002 from what I've been able to find.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
But if you look on prosoundweb.com, where Karl and I both spend a good deal of time there, great blogs and articles and some really deep forums in there. If you're familiar with the old sound man, he wrote these articles. He was in favor, he kind of bah humbugged the whole stereo and 5.1 and all this other stuff that was going on in live mixing and raised the banner of zoned dual mono, ZDM. I actually printed that on my business T-shirts that I was an authorized ZDM engineer. I sent him a copy. But the concept is that, he didn't want to cheat anybody in the audience out of any information. And, I had already kind of adopted that frame of mind mixing theater, especially community theater or high school theater. Aunt Edna's going to be upset if she comes into town to see her little nephew Billy in Les Mis and she can't hear him because he's panned to the opposite side of the auditorium. And just took that same philosophy into rock and roll mixing. I had started out panning because I had a mixer and it had pan knobs and I was going to tweak them. But the more I got to think about it, especially in wider venues, and I think this is the key that I'm really trying to hone in on is, how wide is the venue? How wide is my coverage? And is everybody sitting close enough to center to be able to appreciate me? Can I rebuild a soundstage or create a soundstage and have that still work out so that nobody's getting cheated out of anything in any seats? Or do I need to, do some different stuff? I mean, mixing straight mono is just horrific, and I think my mixing suffered for a number of years because I was doing that. It's just a really squashy, dead thing, and if you're in this, what would be the sweet spot of a stereo mix is a really horrible spot to sit if it's a pair of mono stacks. So anyway, what Karl's got a knitted brow across the way. I don't know, are there thoughts bubbling up on the topic?
Yeah, and it's probably a terrible segue to get into it. All right, I was thinking back to the first time I ever mixed on an EXO rig. It was at an outdoor amphitheater, and the stacks were set up pretty wide. But now thinking about it, I think the boxes actually had a really wide coverage. I don't think it was 90. I think there were 120 boxes.
I think EXO boxes do tend to be wider.
And it was like the first generation maybe of the Geo boxes. And I remember, on that tour, I kept a journal mixing, and I remember it was the first time I ever experienced that in a live venue. I was panning. I had the ability to pan things too wide, as in I felt that the stereo field was wider than I needed it to be, which was kind of a wild experience. And really all I was doing then was panning, like drum overheads and I think the two rack toms. That was it, but it was like, wow, I could actually send it too far, where me being in the middle, I was like, wow, that first tom is actually too far to the right, where it was making me uncomfortable being in the sweet spot. So, that whole thing with the width of the venue, I think that's what made me think of that. Mm-hmm. It was a wide stage and, open air amphitheater, and it was a cool experience. It sounded great, but just noticing that I had the ability to take things that wide, really made me concentrate from that day forward on making sure that everyone in the venue was hearing everything that was happening on stage, or at least the best that I can make that possible.
And you're really Don Quixote on that one. I mean, it's the impossible task. You can't do it. I mean, I've been a couple places that have come really close, but even there, the town ballroom here in town comes to mind. I mean, it's probably one of the better 1,000-cap rooms in the country right now. They got some, not necessarily, they're not VDOS, but they have some decent line arrays in there. But they really had a guy, with some good ideas in his head and was willing to sit down and spend some time with Smart. And it's amazing. It's a weird-shaped venue, and there's weird balconies, but you can walk from right in front of the stacks all the way out to the back of the room, and it just sounds the same, which is awesome to me. I mean, you can stand there at the mix, and you don't have to think, all right, I walked down before, and I heard this, and I heard that. The bass still acts like the bass. I mean, it builds up places, but how freeing that was to mix in that place and just know that, there's not that much variation between what the guys hugging the wedges on the edge of the stage are hearing and the people way in the back by the bars. And there's really not anything, I would love to have all right, kid, here's the tricks, go down this checklist, or, like a choose your own adventure thing where, if venue X is condition A, then implement plan J. But what I do is, I just call upon all the experiences that I've had as an audience member and as a mixer, what was it like being, 5 guys back from the barrier in the pit in a Metallica concert? And, it was cool as heck to have Lars pan across, the 13-piece chromatic toms he was rocking at the time and, just have it come at you like a freight train. If you're in front of the left stack, have it just come zipping at you from the opposite side of the venue. And then, or being in the nosebleeds in an arena, or being in, terrible high school auditoriums or really good high school auditoriums. So what I do when I'm sitting down to kind of figure out how I'm going to go about things, and I've sort of always had the advantage of I travel with a portable PA. More often than not, I was setting up my rig that I knew how it behaved pretty well and what I could do with it and how I could configure it. And I had the option. I wasn't usually ever able to fly it, but, I could boss the lighting guy around and be like, move that tree. I need to put a speaker here. So I got a lot of practice at, placing speakers, and, it's reflecting off the wall when I walk through the house, so I'll tweak it in a little bit. Now it's, the horns are getting into the center mic position. And, so it's not like I sit down and, get in the lotus position and meditate about this stuff when I walk into a venue, whether it's an installed system that I'm going to be mixing on or a system that I'm setting up, that I own or that I'm responsible for setting up. But just as I'm walking through, as I'm shaking hands and, snapping my fingers or clapping my hands to hear what the room sounds like, kind of subconsciously, I'm putting myself in different seats and trying to figure out, all right, are the fans going to be, can I consider the first 20 rows rabid fans who are they're going to hear the show on the wedges anyway, and, it'd be throwing pearls before swine to create a delicately crafted soundstage at them. And then, as we move back, there's going to be the people who are standing, and then you get into the rake seating way in the back of the venue, and there's some folks that aren't ever going to stand up. Or, is it a string recital, and everything's got to be just pristine in every seat. And so I kind of identify my crowd first. And, I can't always do this. Sometimes I have to ask the promoter, hey, what's this gig usually like? Do they run around and scream, or do they sit there and just soak it in, or what? So I identify my crowd, and then I kind of put myself in their shoes. And then the thing that I really look at is the width of the venue. Like I said, I mixed mono for years and years, and I would just be really frustrated with my mixes. Like, it would just be really hard to find a sweet spot, and, I'd walk away from the mix and go down front, like, it's terrible. Go back to the mix and fix it based on what I heard down on the front, and then it would suck for me and the people sitting around me. The thing that sprung it for me, and I mentioned this in my blog post, is I was in this little shotgun bar. The whole joint was maybe 25 feet wide, but it was like 175 feet deep. And just, I had to mic everything and try and shoot everything to the back of the place, but it was narrow enough that everybody could hear both stacks. And I didn't even do any wild panning. I just, put the guitars out to the side. I was using 2 mics on each guitar at the time, so I split them out. And all of a sudden, the vocals were just coming right at you like a, bowling ball, boom, straight down the middle of the alley. And there was all this, the guitars were just a mile wide and not muddy, and everything was really distinct. And the rolling down the tom sounded cool. And so then I started pursuing it, basically, at that point. And mine just went blank. That's awesome listening right there.
Yeah, I think, in my written response, I kind of referred to, especially with guitars and keyboards and stuff like that. If you do hard pan it right and left, and especially if you have a different microphone, or let's say you have a digital console where you might be able to throw a couple milliseconds, like maybe 15 milliseconds of delay on the one input, and it's hard pan left and right. If your ears can hear both speakers or both stacks, whatever, let's just say speakers for a generic term.
Pay attention, kids. This is the money right here.
What happens is your left and your right ear, your brain interprets that as, okay, well, there's a guitar coming into my left ear, and there's another guitar coming into my right ear, and they're playing the same chords or notes or whatever, but there's something different about them. And so it doesn't give your brain the impression that the guitar is right in front of your face. It gives your brain the impression that there's a guitar to the left of you and there's a guitar to the right of you. It's this psychoacoustic effect. So your vocal coming up the middle then, that's going equally between the left and the right speaker, that gives you the impression that the vocal is in front of you. So you're being surrounded by, the music that's happening, because of the panning. And then, with keyboards, if there's an organ sound, a Leslie sound where it's bouncing back and forth, obviously your brain's going to interpret that as there's, some sort of movement there. But really what it comes down to is you might not have changed any of the levels as far as the faders go on the mix, but because the brain is interpreting those sounds differently, that's what makes the difference. We're tricking the brain into, thinking that stuff is happening that maybe isn't happening based on, where the sound is coming from. And I think it's easy to use that to your advantage to, clean up your mix.
And it's almost like free headroom. I'm trying to think of the term that even incorporates it. Like when you're able to create some space in your mix by literally pushing things out to the sides. There's this concept, it's called the phantom center, where if you have, in a real simple system, let's just say one speaker on each side of you, any sound that takes place equally in both of those sources is going to sound to your head like it's coming from straight up the middle. And there's all sorts of implementations like Dolby Pro Logic in home theater type systems, like if it'll actually analyze the audio, and if something appears equally in both channels, it'll kick it to a center speaker. And if it appears differently, then it kicks it to the outside speakers. So you have to actually, when you're mixing for that kind of stuff, be really careful that, something doesn't happen to a vocal that, in the middle of a sentence, it kicks out to the outside speakers and comes back to the center. But if you think of it like that, even if you just have 2 stacks or 2 hangs, like there is this phantom center that if you can clear some of the other stuff out of the way, like your rhythm instruments and your pads and strings and whatever it is, you can really create a ton of room right in the center of the stage for the stuff that's that's really making that money selling the tickets. And I did this to myself for years, and I have it occurring to me in my current gig where I'm stuck in mono. My system was very well designed by some very bright minds, and it used some of the state-of-the-art stuff at the time. But I'm stuck in mono. Like, I have a super wide room. There's 18 or 19 boxes in the front hang that are giving me coverage. But because of that, like because I can't push, say, my acoustic guitars to the outside and my rhythm guitar to the outside, it's really, really tough to make a lead vocal or other lead instrument sit up in the mix without just really slamming the faders. And I've just time after time after time I step up to this mix and it just sounds like garbage, and I move 5 faders a millimeter. And that's the sweet spot. And, depending on what the musicians do, like I'm really running my legs off someday, kind of following them around and keeping the mix built so that I can hear all 13 people playing on stage on a given Sunday. I'm also like, it's a vacation for me to just mix a rock band in there. That's actually something that I think is really cool about Karl. When I met him, we were working for this indie Christian group that had, like 187 members, and usually like 98 or 120 would show up to any. They had basically one drummer and a couple of brothers that sang, and then they had 2 or 3 bass players and a bunch of electric guitar players.
Right. So typical input lists would be, a couple of bass players, but only one bass at a time. But let me preface this whole thing that the drummer is the equivalent of a gorilla hitting the drums. So any venue smaller than like 500 cap, the drums are too loud without the PA.
Without the PA.
So you have that guy, and then you have a bass player, and then the group did start with 4 electric guitars, went down to 3 electric guitars for a while. The 2 singers both played acoustic guitar, but they were smart enough at least where the song that
if one was leading, the other
one was leading, the other would just hit the mute on his tuner pedal. So there was really only one acoustic guitar happening at a time, even though it looked like 2. And then usually 2 keyboard players who had 1 or 2 keyboards apiece, and then along with the 2 lead singers, there was typically 1 or 2 female background vocalists, but that number sometimes went as much as 5 background vocalists. So I think the first time I mixed the band, I think I had well over 20 inputs, and I didn't double mic anything. Right. It was just...
I think I also remember that one. Well, at least the first one that I worked with you is you shut the system off out front and then scolded the band that it was like 107 out front without the PA on. Of course, I was mixing wedges, and that was my first hack at a really big side stage monitor mix. So that was while I was honing my monitor mix skills. The whole reason I kind of brought this up was that I was just amazed at how good Karl was. 1, at wrangling that many musicians, and 2, how he was able to piece that many things together. Because I was mixing 4 or 5, like a 6-member rock band would really be a high input list for me for what I was doing. I came up, mixing really small bar gigs. And now that I literally have his old gig and seeing what it's like to just have a multitude of musicians on stage, and this is a whole other podcast, but just the preparation, like getting to a rehearsal and getting inside the musician's head, that's huge. To be able to sort of know what the performance needs to be and what the music's, what the idea is. Then you can go and apply all your technical skill to make that art happen. And I interrupted him here, but what was really amazing to me was how he was able to listen to all of that stuff. This huge, and it could have easily been. We were limited to 20 or 24 inputs just because of either the equipment that I had, because I was providing gear for a lot of these dates, or we'd be, second or third banana on a festival stage, and there, it's a 48 channel desk, but 24 are locked out for the headliner, and 8 are locked out for, housekeeping duties and DJs and stuff, and then we got us 20 at best, and
right.
2 didn't work, or
there's 12 people on stage, and you need 8 inputs for the drummer.
Yeah,
the big thing with that is knowing the content that you're mixing. With the 2 keyboards and 4 guitars and stuff like that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that yes, you could hear everybody playing every single note that you were playing. That's not the case. There were a lot of judgment calls that I had to make in the mix to make sure that the prominent parts that define the songs were heard, and everything else was just kind of supporting that. There's a lot of ways to kind of pontificate about thinking about a mix, the artistic side of it. And I like kind of like the painting sort of analogy. And I'm not a visual artist at all. But, basically you're going to have background stuff, but then there's going to be things that needs focus. I guess if, I do some amateur photography, and the subject, the focus, that has to be crystal clear, and everything else around it supports the picture and the photograph, but doesn't necessarily have to be crystal clear. And sometimes that needs to be in the background so that the thing that needs to be in focus is in focus, whether that's a vocal part or a lead keyboard part or a horn part, whatever. You need to know what needs to be the center of attention, audio wise, so that you can make the right decisions on what needs to be up or down in a mix.
Definitely, and that's something that's really come to the forefront in my philosophy. Is with that many people on stage, you can easily become a wall of sound. So it's kind of similar to the EQ philosophy of never boost when you can cut. And a lot of times I just with that many people banging away, if it's a really upbeat performance, on a given weekend, I wind up with literally just this wall of sound. But I try to make sure that everybody comes peeking out at least enough that people walk away remembering having heard the piano player. So if she's going to bang away playing chords all day, but at one point has this little light trickling thing going on in the right hand, I'll force that right on top of everything else. Or, a lot of times it'll just happen. The rest of the band will kind of fall away, and in the arrangement, there's these opportunities for different instruments. And it doesn't matter what. Lead instruments, bass, drummer doing something crazy on some alternate percussion. My goal is that nobody leaves, and this applies to a rock band of any size, or a worship act or whatever, house band playing on Sunday, is I want to make sure that nobody has the experience that I had. I went to a Dave Matthews concert, and I saw horn players, but I'm pretty sure I didn't hear him. And there was a guy on a key, there was a key player there too, and he had a bunch of stuff, and it looked cool. I wish I knew what it sounded like. And it was a tricky venue. The guy was mixing under it was a shed, so the guy was in there mixing under the roof. Maybe the folks who were, up in the expensive seats heard all that stuff, but us on the lawn completely missed it. So that's the philosophy, I guess, is, and it helps if you know your stuff. If you're figuring out on the fly for a band you've never met before, you kind of have all those thought processes going on fast forward. And what makes it a lot easier is if you understand your space, if you know what things, even if you're meeting a space for the first time, if you're walking into a club, listen to some music playing back, listen to the opening acts, walk around a lot during sound check and figure out what the space sounds like. And unfortunately, it only comes by experience. There's no chart you can go to, but be thinking about, how am I going to pan stuff? Can I run stuff, a lot of it straight up the middle because it's really wide and I've got to make sure everybody hears everything, or is it narrow enough that I can push some things out to the side, have it still translate, and, put my important stuff out front. And, all right, I think that about wraps it up for panning. I think we've beaten that horse quite a bit, and unless we get any other emails or texts or Twitters to the contrary, I think we'll let it lie for a bit.
Just make sure it's all heard.
Make sure it all, yeah. There's nothing worse than, what? Do you?
Yeah,
have you run into any?
I went to a show, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago, and it's one of my favorite bands. It's I guess as a side note, it's kind of weird, still really being excited, I guess, to go see a band and, just kind of be in awe of the music that they're playing after being around that stuff for so long. But, the people that I was with, they wanted to be close to the stage, and it's like, I could care less about being close to the stage, but, whatever. So we were house left, and I was right in front of, the left, the right. This was at the ballroom.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm 6 feet away from the house left array, and which was cool because the lead guitar player I'm a really big fan of, and he was panned to that side, so I heard every note he played. But the other guitar player that still plays some key parts to a lot of their songs, I didn't hear him the whole night. And it was just, aggravating for me, not as a sound guy, just as someone that loves music and love that band to have to deal with that, to go see the band and, well, there's two guitar players and I heard half of them, and it's like, you got 14 movers on stage, leave one of those home and bring two more guitar mics, please.
Right.
Just,
well, I was going to bring up stage parents. I mean,
yeah.
If you've done any, VBS productions or school theater, it's typically, it happens with kids
Irish
more, but
dancing schools.
It could just as easily be the guitar player's girlfriend. Those people are really annoying when they go, I couldn't hear my little Billy. And, they're usually hollering at the lighting guy, so he'll move a fader that doesn't do anything, and then she'll come over and yell at me that she couldn't see little Billy, so I'll turn the unused fader to...
You turn up the gray lights.
Yeah. But I don't want those people to come around, so that's my motivation. Like, I'm mixing, like, I don't want Ed Ednick to come after me. And that's maybe a bit of a cynical point of view, but, people paid most of the time to come see this stuff, so I want to give them their money's worth. All right, well, moving on. While we were shooting the breeze here before we got started, Karl's been working on an install at a church out in my neck of the woods, and I know some of the contractors doing the work out there, so they've been letting me know what's going on with the progress out there. And one thing we don't do too much on the blog is talk about specific pieces of gear. Not for any particular reason, just it hasn't come up yet. But Karl got to put out a console that I've had a lot of interest in, smaller digital consoles that are, sort of above these little rinky-dink ones like the Presonus or what's that tiny Yamaha one, the 001?
Oh, the 01V. Well, you can't call that rinky-dink. It's been around for 10 years. I mean, that's a...
But it's tiny.
Yeah, it's tiny, but that was a pioneering console.
But
not that I'm endorsing Yamaha. I usually don't.
Like, wow, Karl's sticking up for Yamaha desk? Unheard of. What's in that wine?
Yeah.
But at any rate, there's a new class of digital mixers that are coming in. Sort of like, and again, I hesitate to compare them to Mackies, but like I think back to about 15 years ago when like the Mackie SR24-4-2, whatever, came on the market, and like, for the price and the frame size, you could get a Yamaha or a PV with 16 channels, bass and treble EQ, one pre and one post send, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, Mackie came along. You had, in the same frame size, 24 channels, 4 groups, 6 auxes, sweet mid, all kinds of sweet features, inserts on every channel, and it was kind of a game changer. And 5 years down the road, it sucked, and everybody hated him and couldn't wait to move on to the next thing. But what it did was bring like a mid-sized console feature set down into the really an accessible place in the MI industry. For those of you who aren't familiar, MI is like sort of what you can buy at Guitar Center if you're doing sound for your own band. So it's sort of pro gear, but the gear snobs are probably definitely going to turn their nose up at it. But at any rate, there's this class of digital consoles that is coming in. I mean, they're wouldn't want to call them cheap. I mean, I don't think there's. You might be able to get one of them for under $10,000, but not with enough outboard or I/O on it to make it worthwhile. But there's this whole class that's in like the $10,000 to $20,000 range that's bringing these huge feature sets and huge numbers of inputs and full automation down into the reach of churches and small sound companies and schools and things that would never have even dreamed about it because it would have cost far too much in the past. So I'm going to kick it over to Karl and just see if I can prime the pump here a little bit and get him talking about that little Soundcraft you got installed over at that Baptist church.
Yeah, the church approached us. This project has been ongoing for a couple of years, and they were smart enough to start talking to us when they were still in the design phase with their architect, which helped us, avoid a lot of issues down the line. But when I first met with them, I really wanted to go digital, but I felt it was out of reach. They gave me a really firm budget, and I knew I could get them a system, but I had to fight for what features I was able to give them. So at that time, the LS932, I think, when I first met with them, that console was, even price-wise, still a little bit out of reach, and it's come down a little bit. And Soundcraft had just introduced the SI Compact series, which I believe came out originally with 16 and 24 inputs. And it was right. So at that point, I needed 32 at least. And originally I quoted a 40 input analog desk, along, with, I think, a couple TC reverb units and, maybe 6 channels of compression. And, I was able to meet their budget that way. Well, as time went on, Soundcraft announced that they were coming out with a 32-channel version of that SI Compact series. So I took a look at it and, met with their area rep and stuff like that, and it really seemed like that was going to be the right way to go. It was at a price point that it was a little bit more than the 40-input analog desk, but factoring in the outboard gear, they were kind of hitting about the same point. So I dug into it a little deeper. I got a demo of the 24-channel version that I was able to spend a weekend with, both engineering and as an artist, actually, which was kind of cool. And I was able to get feedback from another engineer about how easy it was to use. And the other engineer, our friend Paul, I literally gave him a 5-minute tutorial on this desk before we sound checked, and he was fine with it. So what this has been able to do, I just got done today training the volunteer staff of this church on this console. It was able to bring unthinkable features to kind of a smaller church application. The system's definitely appropriate for the size of the room, but I think the features that they have now 5 years ago were completely out of reach, where not only do they have a digital console, but I was able to get them the digital snake, which is a 32 by 16, I believe, digital snake over a single Cat5 cable. The preamps live in that digital snake, so we're literally using the desk as a control surface. But the flexibility is I still have the 32 by 16 local I/O that's at the desk at front of house that I can use for whatever I want to. I can mix and match whether I'm using I/O at the stage end or using I/O at front of house, which is great because, in a church application especially, it's they're always bringing different stuff in, or they're going to have 3 different recorders at front of house, and they're going to have they're going to add overflow audio to the atrium and nursery and stuff like that down the line, and it's going to help them in the long run, where they're not going to have to pull everything back to the amp room. They're going to be able to just we can just route it from front of house. I think the biggest thing that made me go with this console was not necessarily the I/O feature set, but how easy it is to use the console and how easy it is to get the information you need to get a mix together and operate a console live. If this was 6 years ago, the only option might have been the Yamaha, 01V. Mm-hmm. I would never sell it to a church because there's too many layers. You get lost. It's a labyrinth. It's just, I'm asking for a service call every Monday morning from the customer I sell an 01V to. Unless they're more advanced users. I've used them before in a church setting, and it took me a month to get used to it, where I wasn't asking the guy that knew more about the console than me, how can I do this? How can I do that?
I want to break in here for a second and just kind of extol the virtues of Soundcraft. I own an analog Soundcraft. I bought a Series 2 a few years ago when I was ready to get a larger frame size. And, because I was in the shop, I just made a fairly hefty purchase. They had Soundcraft come through when the VI came out, the first one. So I got an invite to go touch one before it was really even done. And at the time, I was thinking, well, it'll be fun just to go hang out with some bigwigs. I knew there were going to be some guys in the room that I knew from around the mix scene. And I went up looking at this thing, and it just immediately made sense. I mean, at the time, I was thinking, oh, I'll never go digital. It's so expensive. It's so unreliable. And this was 5 or 6 years ago, about 2006, I think it was, when that dropped. And it was the reliability was finally coming, and with the VIs, the usability was really there. Like, I looked at this thing from across the room, and I was like, oh, yeah, I could walk right up to that thing and mix. And, seeing that, now they're in their third generation or whatever, but I just had the opportunity. Karl got a hold of an SI, brought it into my room for a test drive, and we unplugged it. I mean, I think it took longer to move my Midas out of the way than it did for me to get up and running on this thing, and I was fluent in no time. And I spent 2 hours with it, and then I ran a rehearsal, and it didn't go that much slower than if I had been using, say if I had switched from, a big Midas to a big Allen and Heath. I mean, I felt like it only slowed me down that much. It was just like moving to a different mixer. It wasn't like moving into a whole other world of mixing. And the SIs are actually I felt like a little bit harder to get around on, because it was sort of in between, like on the VI series, you get Vistonics, which is just like, a window into the soul of every input and output. With the SIs, there's some paging and there's some little displays and things that go around. But then when you get down into the SI Compact, you've got this gorgeous fat channel. So everything you poke, boom, the fat channel responds. And, that was a big item for me, thinking about, can I go digital in this situation? Because what am I going to do about volunteers? I don't want to make it so that, it's already hard enough to mix in my room. I don't want to make it so that I'm literally the only person, without having to hire outside help that can handle it. And I think a lot of manufacturers are finally getting a hold of that, like looking at what Midas is doing. Like they're having to come down in price too, and they're getting really affordable. And actually, I hear, now that Presonus is in the market with these little digital 16s and 24s, that there are going to be some other competitors entering the market in those frame sizes. So like you're going to be seeing some really beefy, usable, small digital consoles coming into the marketplace. And not to spout off too long, but when it's weird for a sound guy to try and gauge how a neophyte or even somebody with some limited experience is going to adapt to something. So like as a test, I was looking at the VI and SI software on my laptop. I called up a high school kid who helps me out, and he knows his way around a console a little bit, but not so much that he doesn't call me every single time he has to plug a show in. So he was, he knows he knows a fader from an XLR input. He knows, which side you stand on to mix on, but not much else. And so I said, listen, hey, download this VI software. Call me back when you get it. 22 minutes later, my phone rang. He's like, this makes so much sense. I mean, so that includes, hunting down the web page, finding the model, the download, the install. So, I mean, he probably in about 4 minutes, he, actually dove into this thing. It was like, compression. It's everywhere, and you can just use it, and it's so easy. Like, that's a really exciting thing. Like to be, church sound is just, especially when it's a volunteer crew, or even, or if you have some sort of skilled or semi-skilled leaders and some hangers on, to just know that like you're going to have to turn a product loose, and it's just going to see what it sees, and settings are going to get all out of whack, and things patched and repatched and cross-patched, and to be able to put a solid digital console in there is really exciting. It's an exciting time for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, really my biggest gripe with digital consoles, and I've been, on and off them since about 2004, starting with, the innovation desks, and which I actually thought were pretty intuitive, especially for a first generation of technology. But, the Yamaha PM1Ds that I still loathe to this day. Really my biggest gripe is, okay, well, I want this to resemble some sort of signal flow. I kind of want it to be logical in that sense. And two, I need to be able to access information as fast or faster than if I was using an analog setup, a desk with outboard gear. The first time I really truly felt that I was experiencing that was with the VI6. Mm-hmm. It was everything I wanted was right there. You look at the channel strip on an analog desk and you see, what filters are on and where they're set. And then all you have to do is, turn your head 90 degrees and you can identify, the compressor that you have patched in on that input. and what's going on with, whatever that insert is. And, before, with the other desks that I was on, you could kind of do that sometimes. And, the first time on the Soundcraft VI, I felt like, well, I could do that on every channel every time, which was huge. And now, even with this smaller desk, it's really, I have that information, and it's really, it's liberating for me, as a mixer, but also as someone who is installing and supporting this stuff. I have a new level of confidence as far as, the people that I'm selling it to. I'm confident they're going to be satisfied with it. So it's really great. That whole fat channel thing on the SI Compact is really great. Allen and Heath on their digital consoles have been kind of doing the same thing, which is really cool. I'm trying to think of the other ones. I'm sure, the other ones are kind of doing something similar to that, but it's been a while since I've been in front of a Midas Digi or a Digico. The Avids are kind of the same thing. My first time in front of an SC48 was kind of one of those same experiences, and really I don't know. I don't like having to use a trackball to get around on that console, but I mean, it sounds awesome, and for the most part, I don't need to use it. But it's just I think any mixer needs to be able to get that information immediately, because one, they need it to do their job, but two, they're used to having that available all the time anyways. So
I think the manufacturers are finally realizing that it doesn't have to be exactly like analog, but some things kind of do and some things kind of don't. And there's been enough generations of things coming out and enough information coming back from end users that, the workflow is really becoming this hybrid experience where, stuff that needs to feel analog does. And then if there's a digital way to do things faster or like a non-linear or, stuff that it doesn't look like you would expect it to, but it's actually easier because of that. And something else I like about the bigger digital desks is like on the smaller ones, like, everybody and their cousin mixing bar gigs now has a Presonus. It's kind of getting to be just the thing to have because, there goes your rack. And if you're really crafty, you can park your desk on stage and ditch your snake and just, sit at the bar with an iPad. But you can't, well, I guess if you have multiple iOS devices with some of these platforms, you can, Mackie's got that one that you snap an iPad into it and you can take it out and run around and multiple people can mix at once. That's what I was really looking for. Like on an SI, it's tough for two guys to mix at once. Unless, you're going to, I suppose I didn't spend enough time with it. You could probably figure out some workflows so that you could, one guy could EQ the drums while somebody else was working on the lead vocals with some of the way you can do the pages in the center section. But on the VIs, especially on a VI6, huge console, a lot of things, like I would really want a second guy there, especially in a pressure situation. And, I could say, all right, I'm going to handle everything to the left of the master section and you take care of all the vocals down here. Okay, we're separate, but if vocal land suddenly, is pretty tame, the guy mixing to my right can pull up my channels in his section, tweak drum gates while I'm busy EQing floor toms or something like that, and, really kind of save the day. Like it's a way that two guys can really collaborate on a mix again because, in the analog days, well, which I'm still in a lot of the time, you get those pressure situation where there isn't rehearsal or there isn't time for a proper sound check or even a line check. So like you have art starting to happen and you're still figuring out your mechanics and your science, and it's frustrating that either watch somebody struggle with a digital interface and know that you could help them out, but there's not physically room for you to stand next to him and do it, or hear that his drum gates are totally choking off but he's focusing on the cute lead singer, and without bumping him out of the way and poking the fat channel into another zone, you can't do that. But that's becoming a reality on some larger consoles that you can't. Not only is it a smooth workflow, but it's smooth enough that multiple people can get into the workflow and really handle some complex stuff on the fly.
Yeah, theater with live music is a huge application for that.
Right.
The production that you just got out of this winter, how awesome would that be to have, the VI6 or the Pro 6 or something like that, where you could have one engineer literally just worrying about the musicians, everything from the front of house mix to monitor mixes, and then just on that I don't want to say auxiliary section, but that far right section, you have the actor engineer worrying just about the spoken word part of the production. That's really cool. I mean, I don't know how they did it. I don't have a huge theater background, but I mean, I imagine they were probably running, dual consoles a lot of the time just to do that because, there were enough cues to justify it. So it's,
and everything's growing. I mean, when I started working on community theater 10 years ago, I was mixing 12 input shows and a couple of floor mics, and now it's not uncommon to pack a 40 channel desk in a venue that holds less than 1,000 people on, kids' summer theater. I mean, I'm looking at 26 channels of wireless mics, half a dozen mics planted at different places around the stage. I got inputs coming at me from the pit. I got samplers. I got playback. I got sound cues. And, moving into a digital zone, even just having somebody to, do like guitar techs do, just switch my effects for me. Like if I could just have, instead of having a guy sitting next to me with my notes, like have him be my programmer and my facilitator. Like, all right, make sure, before we switch scenes, you save all this stuff and what scene numbers go with what, and just manage that for me so I can take my head out of the mechanics of it and just focus on what's going on stage. So yeah, lots developing there. I mean, it's still an exciting time. One of the most exciting things to me about Digity is, and I already kind of mentioned it a little bit, is, you can park your mixer on stage, whether you have, an SI, where it's like a direct replacement for an analog desk or something you got a digital snake. The days of a festival with a 3-story house built out of scaffolding and canvas at the front of the house can really start to go away, where you can have the desk parked at the side of the stage and the monitor mixer is on that desk, and then the guy mixing in front of the house is like, out with the punters with his iPad or whatever tablet, and he's not chained to that mix. There's no excuse at that point. Like, he's in the sweet spot. He doesn't know what it's like for us out here on the lawn. Well, he could absolutely join you out there on the lawn, or at least hopefully have spent some time out there. I mean, I know guys, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Applied Audio out in Rochester. The Applied guys do big graduations where they have 16 delay zones. And there's no mix position. There's just, Zip or Dan or whoever's out there with their tablet and getting this delay right and that delay right, and it all comes together beautiful, and there's not a bit of tech in sight. There's some speakers tucked in out of the way places, and it gets the tech out of the way of the art in that, it basically either not completely removes, but gets that gorilla out of the room, that mix position that's taking up the good seats and blocking sight lines and stuff.
And the skeezy promoters like that.
Yeah. Right. Sell more seats. So yeah,
I like that ability, that iPad ability. I'm resistant to having to do it though. I like having the console. I like having the faders, in reach. I don't, I'm not ready to swipe a screen to move down the console
and rely on Wi-Fi.
Right. And I've I guess griped about this too, before in a post is like, yeah, this great technology is becoming more accessible, but at what point does it become too accessible?
I think it's already there. I mean, I've seen enough guys with Yamaha pole speakers and home-built subs who are mixing on Presonuses, and oddly enough, still have 48 spaces of rack stuff out with them. I don't know what that's about. Just because it's
compensating.
Yeah. But yeah, just because you have full dynamic processing on every input and output and parametric EQs, I mean, they clearly don't know what they've got or don't know how to use it. So it really still comes down to your ears and what's in between them, and how well you understand your material and who's going to listen to it, and how you're going to tailor things to meet them. So, really, if they get down to, I'm having trouble coming up with buzzwords, if there's nano computer digital mixers with wetware interfaces and I can just think the mix out in the house, it sounds far-fetched now, but that's really probably where we're going realistically. If you can,
really, everybody in the audience will be able to think the mix.
Yeah, then it'll be like the Minority Report. But yeah, everybody can mix. Maybe we'll just make it so everybody can tweet to me, and then I'll I'll automate a bunch of stuff.
Well, no,
and
we'll
read their
be
tweets.
unemployed. That's why we need to invent it, so we can just retire on it.
Well, there's always tube amps. I mean, that's really going to be my go-to. If things get too bent out of shape, I'm going to study up tube technology and fix old Fenders for guys, because the guys that are doing it right now probably honestly aren't long for this earth, so they're going to be looking for somebody to hand their clients down to, because tube amps are never going away. Just face it.
Let's hope not.
All right. Well, we just crossed the hour mark a little bit ago. So if there's anybody still listening, I don't know if anybody's going to hear this at all. I hope you do. And I hope it was interesting. And I also hope you'll get in contact with me, whether it was interesting or not. Let us know what you thought about this. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you think we're fools, if you agree with us, any input at all would be useful. Or even if you'd like us to, if you have questions for us, that's a definite. Send that stuff in. If you'd like us to continue on a subject, or if you have something to contribute to a subject, we're looking at getting set up to do roundtables. Probably via Skype and or whatever, Google Plus or whatever multi-chat client there is. We're coming up with a process for that. And really the whole idea of this was just to encourage exchange. And there's no limit to it. I mean, if you're a noob or you're just a lover of music or a tech weenie or, just whatever, anybody who's interested in the biz.
Maybe you're tech curious.
If you're tech curious, contact us. I'm not going to spout off all the URLs and at thises and that's and underscores and things right now, but if you Google smart to noise ratio, you'll find some results. You might find some Twitter posts. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. If you know either of us personally, by all means, contact us through any of those channels. Our cell phone numbers are always open, and we're looking to share the wealth here. We've got about 4 decades of experience between us.
Probably.
I've got nearly 2 full ones to my name.
Yeah, you're a little older than me.
That's right. I was asking for that. But like I say, we've been at it for a long time. We've got a lot of road behind us and a lot of gear, and we're just at a point where we're certainly not. We don't want to sound like we have big heads, but we know some stuff, and we're looking to share it. And I think my biggest motivation is just my parents. They, having grown up with a sound guy in the house, they know what sounds good, and they know that most of the events they go to don't. So if you're out there mixing, we just want to encourage you to get better. And when you do get better, teach somebody else how to get better. And maybe
teach
things
us.
Yeah, and definitely throw ideas our way. Neither of us are too proud to. Nobody's going to turn their nose up at an idea. We got where we got because we were open to experimentation and new ideas. So we're going to wrap it up with that, and once again, this is where the theme music would play if we had any. But royalties being what they are, it's going to take somebody sitting down to compose some for us. So
maybe salsa music,
whatever, man. You would pick Latin's the one music I listen to. When I became a sound guy, I figured I just I grew up and I go to work for Metallica, not realizing that I would probably mix everything but the music I like. But salsa's the one thing I can't. I lived in a Latin neighborhood during the 2 most miserable years of my life. Wasn't miserable because I was living with Latinos. It was just I was that miserable guy in his 5th year of college, and that was the music I was hearing day in and day out.
See, I like mixing Latin jazz.
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah,
it's definitely exciting.
I like that.
All right. Okay. Well, if you're feeling inspired to write us a salsa infused